Okay, here we are in 2025. I've got some notes that remind me of what people wanted to know about this accident I had back in 1974. And I was in an airplane that crashed and caught on fire. And it was most everybody died. So my personal recollections of being on that crash and being inside the burning plane would, I think, be interesting. So let me start. It was September of 1974. It was a beautiful fall day in Charleston, South Carolina. I got on the plane to take a business trip to Washington, D.C. I got there early, couldn't sleep that night for many reasons, and I just woke up and I said, well, let's just go there. So I got there around, 6 in the morning or something. I just checked in and just sat down and watched people gather. And I watched them and looked at them. I didn't see anybody I recognized, but I was kind of watching them move and talk to each other. And obviously, they're all thinking about where they're going or what they're doing. And when it came time to get on the plane, we just walked right through the gate, checked our pass, and chose our seat. And I chose the right side of the economy section, which is where I prefer. It's right before the wing so I can see what's outside and right behind the first class partition. So, yeah, both legroom, quite simply. And on my side, I was near the window and the white Navy out uniform was in the aisle seat. And between us, it was vacant. The flight was totally uneventful. We went over some clouds, occasionally clearing, you can see the ground below us. And it's a short flight to Charlotte. I don't know exactly how long, but I was nothing happened. We broke out of the clouds and did a big S turn to line up with a runway, which is what you do, I guess. You little off for vectoring for coming in the airline. And we broke out of the clouds and it was crystal clear, just like after a rainstorm. And you can see as you made this turn, the right side of the plane, I could see the airport lights. I can see the landing lights that are green and red, and we were perfectly lined up. And I could see the colors of the cars in the parking lot, and I could hear the flaps being extended. It was ready for a perfect landing. We continued down. We went to a little cloud bank. We came out of the cloud bank, and I would say we're about 600 feet up. In other words, it's for a light plane, that would be traffic pattern altitude. So, but of course, this is a big jet, but I guess we're real close to the runway. We came out over a parking lot, and the parking lot for a factory, and the people were on strike, and they were waving signs, and they were being on strike. And one guy in particular looked at us and he ran toward the plane. He dropped his sign and gestured to get up, and I could look him right in the eyes and see him. He was so close, and he looked pretty distressed. I still thought we're coming in kind of low, but I had no reason to think it was abnormal. Then we flashed over this road, and later heard it was called York Road. And this red pickup truck, good old boy pickup truck, red, kind of dirty, and the guy pulled off the road to avoid hitting the plane. And that's, I guess, the first time I realized things are really bad. I remember his face pressed up against the window. And then we flashed over some green and we came down hard on the right wheel, I believe. And then the plane kind of bounced and the left wing dragged into the ground and the plane seemed to cartwheel over. And then we hit the ground and the nose broke off. And it was just sort of like if you see a snake running through the ground, it's sort of wiggle, 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 wiggle. And there was a great rush of green vegetation and red dirt rushing through the aisle between us. And my my shoe came off, and I knew when my shoe came off, we were in an airplane crash, not a hard landing, and, we had totally missed the, runway because we were digging up the ground and the nose of the plane had torn off, and I was all bowed over in my seatbelt, and I had it too high, so it was around my rib cage, and it blew all the air out of me. They tell you not to do that when they buckle up, put it low. It's good advice. In my case, it's knocked all the air out of me, and we came to a halt, and I got up and took a deep breath of air, and there was a whoosh sound, and flames were coming out. The nose of the plane was broken off, and then flames were going like a blowtorch through it. But surprisingly, if you're a chemist and you know these things, I guess, with Bunsen burners, the outside of a plane of a flame is where it's hot, and inside it's not. So I was inside the plane, but it wasn't as hot as it might have been. But I was holding my breath because it felt just like diving off the high dive in a swimming pool. When you land and the bubbles are all rushing around you, the sound of the flames and the feeling of the flames on my face were just like I was underwater, so I naturally held my breath. I jumped up and tried to get out of the seat, and I could not because I still had the seatbelt on and trying to get the seatbelt off. My fingers were sticking to the buckle because I realized I was in the flames. And I got it off and I jumped up and my right shoulder hit the side of the fuselage right above the window, and I fell down on the floor of the cabin. And the guy next to me, wearing the navy whites, was leaning over and screaming at me and beating on me. And I looked up and his face was black and his skin was cracking. You can see the blood running down his face. And I realized we were doomed. So I very slowly stood up and looked around. And you could see in the sort of a yellow haze, you could see the flames, but they weren't burning hot. And most of the people that I saw were trying to get out of the seat, but of course, they were on fire. They were yelling and screaming, breathing in the flames. And the aisles were, of course, littered with people trying to get out, so nobody got out. And I said, well, I'm doomed. I sat back down on the chair, and I had this sort of fantasy, daydream of my children, and they're on this green sward on a hill, and I was floating down, and I felt this incredible radiance behind me, and they looked up and they waved, and then I was back in the plane, and I looked up and I could see that the roof of the plane was broken off, and I could actually see a green bough of a tree above me, and I jumped. I don't know how I did it, but I jumped up, and I landed on the foot that did not have the shoe. And the side of a plane is about this thick, and it's it's broken off, it's full of jagged metal, and I was standing barefoot on that. And there was a green bough right in front of me, and I grabbed it, and at the green leaves turned black, I realized I was standing in the middle of the hot part of the flame. So I jumped, and we were lying flat on the ground, no landing gear, in front of the wing, and it was high up. I jumped, and I landed in this, what we call sawgrass, skinny little, stems, nasty, nasty little hooks, and I charged through it like you're running through the surf, and the 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 sawgrass tore most of my burning clothes off. The back of my suit was still attached, and I wiped the burning plastic double knit suit. It's good for traveling in because it doesn't wrinkle. And there was some question whether that caused me more burns or provided um, certain immunity from the flames, but I don't know. And I hunched forward and I broke the back of my suit off and wiped the burning plastic out. That's how my hands got so hurt. And running through the sawgrass had torn most of my pants off. So I'm sitting there in my underpants and a belt, and the white pockets are just sitting there. Back of my suit was still on, but I thought, "Geez, this must look weird." And I took this enormous breath once I landed in the sawgrass and a big breath in air. And then I said to myself, "Oh, maybe the plane is going to explode." So I ran up this hill and it did explode, but not like the pyrotechnics you see in the movies. It was more of a big whoosh sound. And you could just feel the heat on my back, which was now exposed, because I took my suit off. And I could still hear the people screaming. And I looked up and I expected to see flames, but there weren't flames. They were just shimmering over the airplane. And then about 30 feet up, it turned black, sooty black smoke. And there weren't anybody screaming in the plane anymore. So I started walking up this hill, and there was a cornfield, and all the everything was brown, and the corn had fallen off, and the dried up little pieces of corn were being carried away by the ants, and the birds were singing in the tree like they do when something happens. And I saw a guy walking up, and his head had been hurt, and it was bleeding, and his right arm was bleeding. And it was Roy Hendricks. I'm Richard Arnold. Here's my number. And he gave me his number, and he fainted. So I picked him up, and I'm walking up the hill carrying Roy Hendricks, who must have been a sight. And this farmer came by riding his tractor. It was red. It was a Ford. And he had a bush hog on the back. And a bush hog is a big circular lawnmower using to cut down heavy brush. And he said I was going the wrong way. York Road was up here. He didn't call it York Road. He said, the car's up here. That's where the ambulance is going to come. So I'll give you a ride on the bush hog, which was awkward because I had to hold on to the bush hog with one hand that was badly burned, holding on Roy with the other and bouncing up and down. I kind of thought to myself I could have carried him more easily, but we got there. And they laid Roy down, and I told everyone his name. And there was some ambulances there. And there was this green sward, and there was nobody on it. Later on, I'm told it was full of people who were dying. And the psychiatrist I talked to said, "Oh, that's called psychic numbing. You couldn't see that." He said, "I have a picture right here. Can you see that? There's a picture of me and Roy. I'm sitting on the bumper of this car." He said, "You don't see here, here, here?" And he said, "You're pointing to grass." I said, "I'm pointing to people out there dying." I said, "I can't see them." He said, "This happens. It's more than you can handle." Meanwhile, I'm sitting there waiting for my turn on the ambulance, and John McDowell, the guy, the farmer whose field we landed on, came by and said, "You got to take Richard. He's hurt." And the guy said, "No, he's going to bleed out, and we can't waste. There's no room, no sense in taking him to the hospital." So John went to these other people around, says, "Please take Richard, take Richard, take Richard." And they said, "No, we're not going to." And John, bless him, walked up to the guy with the clipboard and he said, "I'm just going to ask you one more thing. I'm going to ask you to take Richard in an ambulance. And if you don't, I will crush your throat. Just nod your head. That'll work for yes." And he nodded his head. And that's how they saved me. They wrapped me up in a white sheet, and they took me to sort of some part of the airport. It looked like one of the passenger terminal wings. And then they put me in an ambulance and took me to the Charlotte hospital. And I'd worked with the Medical University of South Carolina for about a year or two, and they had a lot of good friends there. And I knew they had Dr. Moncrief had a regional burn center, which is specialized expertise, and I knew they probably didn't have it in Charlotte, and that they were just waiting for me to die in Charlotte instead of in the field. I thought the nurse who was watching me, she said, I'm really thirsty. Could I have some water? He said, no, with your burns, it could cause you to die. And I said, oh, well, if I'm going to die anyway, can I have a drink of water? And she said, no. So I said, can I see the doctor? The doctor came and he said, he's very nice. He's in pallets of care. Oh, there, how you feeling? And all this. I said, I'd really like to go home. Oh, yeah. He said, but I mean, Medical University of South Carolina, they have an excellent burn unit there, and I'd like you to call Dr. Moncrief and then see if he'd accept me as a patient. And he came back and says, Dr. Moncrief will take you. We have a helicopter. And they took me. The rest of the story is about, I guess, the burn unit and reconstructive surgery and living with these burns. People have said, why do you think the airplane crashed? And I said, distracted driving. If you got the chance to hear the cockpit voice recorder, which I got the chance to hear it 3 times, and it's one of the greatest secrets of the world is what happened on there, you would understand why that airplane crashed, why a perfectly normal, healthy airplane was driven into the ground by 2 totally competent pilots. It's a combination of distracted driving and avoiding certain topics that you should never talk about because they're mind traps and they put you into an emotional dither. Well, the people at the medical university knew me because they would come visiting and chat with me because they always knew where I was day or night, any time of day or night. I was there, and they would say, "Oh, we don't want to bother you with any problems we're having." I said, "I love problems. Give me something to look at other than the ceiling because I can't look left, can't look right. All I can see is the ceiling." So they talked about computer problems, and they went on to essentially personnel problems. One of my first, visitors was, the hospital administrator, and I thanked him for taking me because I was probably doomed and certainly cost him a lot of money, and he said, "Well, we are a teaching hospital and a research hospital, and, you know, you're an interesting case." And I said, "Well, I still appreciate it. I hope my medical insurance is up to this. It's gotta be pretty fierce." He said, "Don't worry about that." And he said, "Anything else?" I said, "I seem to be alternate between horrible fever and horrible chills. And I wonder if you could fix your air conditioning." He said, no, 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 it's not the air conditioning. You've lost so much of your flesh. You've lost, that's one of your great uh, heat adjustment organs, the largest organ in your body, they say, in terms of weight and mass, is your skin. And you've lost the ability to control your temperature. So your thermostat is going wild. So I just have to put up with it. He said, "Yes, you do." They were good to see me, but, walking down the street, I was sometimes people would react in horror. So I talked to the physical therapy people, said, "I don't care about at walking and picking up things with an adaptive tools. I wanna learn how to walk normal, and, they taught me how to walk normal, and I stand up straight, and, read at Eastern Airlines had me go to a whole bunch of psychiatrists, and I thought they were wonderful, and I'd say, "How do you adapt? What are the adapting tools you can use?" And they said something very interesting. Basically, people react to you the way you react to them or how you react to yourself. So engage people, talk to them, see what they're doing. Everyone likes to be asked that. The one difference was children. Children would come up and say something like, "Hey, man, you're all messed up. What happened to you?" I said, "Oh, yeah, you're right. I'd forgotten about that. I was in an airplane crash." "Wow. How'd you get out?" I said, "It's a combination of luck, obviously luck, and I would take up swimming. That's good. So you can learn how to hold your breath. And I would hope you're lucky, and then don't give up. Because there are a number of times when couldn't get the seatbelt off, I could have given up. When I got off and hit my shoulder on the wall, fell down, I could have given up. When I did give up, I had this fantasy where I was thinking about my children, and it woke me up, and I was still holding my breath. I had to sue Eastern. Said, why won't they settle with me? And this lawyer said, well, they've settled with everybody except a survivor with scarcely a scratch, someone who's totally dead and his estate is suing her, and you're the guy in the middle. You're the only guy who was so badly hurt. So they picked you to go to trial. And I just said, oh, bummer. Suing was actually ended up being a very emotionally satisfying thing because you have so many rough edges. Because tried to settle out of court with Eastern, and they simply told me that God meant this as a lesson to me and and serve an example to other people. And I said, well, I'm in the phone book. Anytime God wants to talk to me, I'd love to meet him. I don't have anything in questions in particular, but I'm sure I'd like to hear what he had to say. I'm not a hard guy to get with. You're asking whether I believe God meant this to happen to me. No, I don't. I don't. It's a mystery. I don't know why bad things happen to people. From September to basically, I got out in for Christmas Eve, and then they put me back in the hospital for a couple of weeks. And then I went about 5 or 6 hospital events where they did reconstructive surgery on my hands, trying to do what's called tendon releases, so I could move what was left of my hands and my arm and that sort of stuff. And that continued, from, 1974 to, 75 and 76, uh, and, 77 when I was in Portland, Oregon. Roughly 5 years for the trial date, then they appealed and appealed and appealed and appealed, and it was finally settled out of court in 1981, so that would be, 6 years. I learned how to tie a half Windsor knot, but with my left hand, not enough there on the right hand. And I learned how to get dressed. And I learned that loafers are better than anything you need to lace. And I learned to adapt and adapt and adapt and adapt. And I won't say I ever forgot, but I remember what the psychiatrist told me. People treat you the way you treat yourself and how you treat them. And one of the You fool reading psychiatry books will bore you to death, but one of the best things I've ever read was Stanislavski, the Russian director. He wrote 3 books about how to act, and they're absolute classics. And I think I learned a great deal from reading Stanislavski on how to meet people and talk with them and get them to talk about other than my deformities or what happened to you. Though, so it hasn't happened in many years. Maybe I learned how to pull it off. No, I never stopped working because when I was in the burn unit, people would come with computer problems. What do you think we ought to do about this? What do you think you do? And I never stopped. And one of the thing about if you can see nothing but the ceiling above you for 3 months, first session was 3 months, you're looking for something to think about. So I could run through the operating system. I knew the applications. I could see where the logical, what's called NQ, DQ operations were happening or not. And I could get very good at analyzing these things as a great machine because the computer is a great machine, and everyone is different because it's doing the applications for what are human activities. So I got deeply involved in the human activities. Who needs this? What do they need it for? And all the mechanisms that go under the covers that people don't know exist. I don't know how computers work anymore. I have some ideas, but again, it doesn't matter. The thing that matters, though, is the human aspect of it. And I never stopped doing that. Even when I was in the left IBM and I was in the ski club, I made websites, databases at the ski club, and I learned C++. So I'd make a toy for my friend John Neal. He didn't like it. It was bouncing balls and it had witticisms. And when I was in IBM, I wanted to learn this programming system called APL, which is nobody knows about it anymore, but I wanted to practice it. So I wrote an I Ching program, so you could roll the jaw sticks and you could do whatever you wanted to get different ways you get your tell your fortune. And they would very mysteriously control the screen and they'd give you these mystic sounding things, which I always thought was non-directed psychotherapy. But people loved that. They'd ask the computer something and they'd leave and they'd have something to think about. And maybe they'd never thought about that because it did, although it came from them, basically, it was the uncarved block, the Rorschach test, whatever, that the computer was giving it to them, and they would try to see, "How does this answer my question?" And they began to think about, "Who am I? What do I want? Where am I? Where do I wanna go?" And it got them thinking, and every humans, when they apply themselves to that, are pretty good at that, unless you get into one of these twisty little things where you get lost. Hence my comment about the pilots got into these twisty things they're talking about, which have all been edited out of the quote, the transcript that you can see publicly. So the twisty little mind tracks are still there for everybody, I would guess. I always ask myself, is this the second time I've asked myself this question or the 33rd time? And so I haven't done anything. Maybe it's not a problem at all. Maybe nothing needs to be done. You don't need a solution to every problem. You have no choice. They can't give you enough anesthesia to keep you from feeling pain. There are these procedures called debridement, which means taking the trash off or something. Basically, burns have rotting flesh on top. You got to clean it off. If it's dead, it'll rot. Clean it off. I asked him one time if he used billow pads, and they said, "Yeah, we tried that, but they cloud up too much. It don't work. It's best to use fresh towels and brush off all the dead skin and scum. And then after that, you're bathed in what's called betadine. It's sort of it looks like iodine that you used to use when you were a kid, but it's maybe it is, but that provides a superficial sterile surface to anything that's going to fall on you, and things will fall on you and start to breed. So these debridements are painful beyond all imagination. And they would say, "Oh, that's glad it hurts." If it didn't hurt, it meant it wasn't healing, because the first that happens in the healing is the nerves start to return. So the pain is an indication that you're still alive and you're healing. Does it hurt? You betcha, but you have no alternative. I learned that the friends I had were still my friends, and I don't care about the other people. Your allies, you can help. You can help them. They can help you. Take care of your friends, your allies, work together, and you never know who those people will be. I think recognizing you can't do everything yourself, and you never know when an ally will just pop out of nowhere and save your butt. I learned that in the Air Force. Certainly true in other places in life. You never know who's going to say, pick you as an ally and say, I'm going to help Richard. But it's good to be open to it.